I'm Jim Collison, live from Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Theme Thursday, Season 2, recorded on August 18th, 2016. Theme Thursday is a Gallup webcast series that dives deep into the CliftonStrengths Finder themes, one theme at a time, and today's theme is Relator. If you have questions, comments, or contributions during the webcast, we do have a live chat room that's available for you right below in the main video window, although we're having a little issues with our live page. You're watching the video or listening to this on audio, you don't really even care. But if you are listening live, there is a video, or there is a chat wing box right below the main video window. At the bottom left-hand corner, it says log in. Click that, and then choose the guest account, put your name in, hit submit. Don't have to create an account to get in, but that's how you get your questions into the chat room. Then there's some red double boxes in the upper right-hand corner. If you click that, it'll pop that box out, and you can chat with us live during the program. If you're listening to the recorded version, you need custom strengths coaching solutions for small, medium, or large organizations. We do that as well. Contact us at coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center, just gallupstrengthscenter.com, for all your coaching resources and training needs. You can also catch the video now, both streaming and downloadable audio, basically every way you can think of to watch these or listen to them. If you have any questions, we have a gigantic resources page now available for you at the Gallup at the coaches blog. Just go to coaching.gallup.com. Seriously, if you've not been out there in a while, today is the day to go out there. Coaching.gallup.com. Micah Libranton is our host today. She's my favorite learning and development consultant here at Gallup. She's also the queen of the blog. Micah, great to have you out, and welcome to Theme Thursday.
New title, Queen of the Blog. That's awesome. It's so great to be here, Jim. Thanks.
We are talking about Relator today. Good digging. Hopefully everybody got a chance to listen to Season 1 of Relator, a really good video or audio. If you haven't listened to that, just pause this, go back and Google Theme Thursday Relator. You'll see it in YouTube or however you want to do it. Listen to that first, because that will kind of build on this. Then rejoin us again. You don't really have to do that, but you should be doing that each week. We make them available in the blog, the recaps. We do a post for you that makes this super simple. But Micah, when we think about Relator, what do we think about?
So I think at the heart of Relator is love. It is this courage to love others. It's about not just having about the type of relationships that you have that you take them very seriously, and that it goes beyond just that surface level. It's a pretty common theme. It's in the top 5 most occurring themes in the world. But I think a lot of times it's because it's so common, because the word feels kind of common, we often don't think very deeply about it. So I'm really excited to really dig into Relator today.
Good. Well, it is deep, so let's go deep. Let's get the definition right off the page.
It is deep, yeah. So if you've never joined us before, maybe you picked Relator because you have it. One thing you should realize is that we create these companion guides for you every week, and you can go download them on our website and follow along. The companion guide at the very top is going to have our short definition. So for Relator, it says this: people exceptionally talented in the Relator theme enjoy close relationships with others. They find deep satisfaction in working hard with friends to achieve a goal. I love that word, with friends to achieve, because very often it doesn't say just working hard with others. To Relators, there's a friendship, I think, necessity to who you're going to work alongside. So it's let's get somewhere, but let's not get there alone, and let's not get there as colleagues. Let's get there as friends.
Yeah, we have Woo 2 and Relator 7 or 8, and I always call one Deep and Wide. You know that song, Deep and Wide? You know that song?
Deep and Wide.
I think I even said that in Season 1 when we were talking about that. I always see Woo as wide and shallow, and I always see Relator as narrow and deep, and it's kind of just a way for me to kind of qualify those. JB says it's interesting if we looked at other themes at which ones go deep and which ones go wide. It's an interesting thought, but I think let's dig in. When we think about the themes power and edge, what do we think about that?
Yeah, that is interesting. So the themes power and edge, what makes it valuable? People especially strong in Relator talents form solid, genuine, and mutually rewarding relationships. Those relationships are close, caring, and trusting. JB, it's interesting that you bring up that thought of what other themes go deep versus which ones are a little bit more broad and wide. This morning, I was thinking about Relator as the social intellection. So we talk about intellection as having this deep awareness that comes from contemplation and reflection. I almost think Relator acts that way toward people. So it's not just that I'm sort of curious about you, I want to get to know you, and then I'm going to move on. It is, if I encounter you and I have Relator, I'm going to think about you and think about my relationship toward you to a greater level than other people ever get to. So I think a lot of times people see Relator, and when I'm coaching people with Relator, sometimes they'll say, you know what, I don't quite understand how this is so strong within me. They'll say things like, yeah, I like people and I've got some close relationships, but I'm not out there relating all day long. And I think that's where we realize it's not about the quantity of relationships. It really is about quality for people with high Relator.
Yeah, in one of those things, well, it comes up with harmony oftentimes too, and it can look like it or it can mask like it. It can, I think, sometimes because empathy is what I meant to say.
Okay.
I think it looks because empathy feels how people feel, and yet when you have high Relator and you know people, you come at it from not maybe a sixth sense, but from what you know about them, how you've dug into their relationship, right? You know their pains, you understand what they're going through, not in a way like you just feel it, but because you know it, right? You know those people, you know what's going through with them. So I think sometimes those two, that didn't show up, empathy didn't show up anywhere on our lists here when we went through, both the raw versus mature, or the likely and unlikely, or even the ones that made it in the Facebook group. But I think sometimes we see that as that ability to really understand people and their emotions.
Well, I think if you're using and really strengthening both empathy and Relator, then they both have sort of a reciprocity to them. Empathy is I'm going to feel how you feel, but empathy by itself doesn't necessarily need to do anything about that. Relator is I'm going to be curious about whether we can have a relationship. I might not have to do anything about that. But if I intentionally want to build connections with people, I could do it with empathy by tapping into their feelings and being very present and, in fact, feeling those alongside them, or I could build that relationship through Relator, which might be a little bit more of a thoughtfulness about our connection, not just a thoughtfulness about your feelings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a good discussion. Let's think about the raw versus mature. This is quickly becoming my favorite part of the program. When we think of raw versus mature, what do we think about?
Yeah, we think about the idea of a developmental journey. Raw is not necessarily bad. Mature is used in a great way. But when we think about raw talent, it's something to look for. It might be raw because it's never been noticed as a positive thing in you. It might be raw because you've never put a name to it. It might also be raw because you're just sort of inexperienced in speaking about this as a talent, as a tool in your disposal. But I like to think about raw and mature as having a spectrum of discovery and development. So at one end is the raw side and mature at the other. With Relator, raw Relator can be closed. And the reason that Relator could be closed, maybe a better word for this is picky or choosy or selective, because Relator isn't interested in surface level relationships. It can mean that if I'm going to make a connection with you, I'm going to make a really big investment. And that can be overwhelming, even for people with Relator, if they're around a whole bunch of new people, because they're probably surveying the scene and could be considering, where's my biggest return on my investment? Who's going to give me that mutual sort of love? Where am I going to get that relational reciprocity? And I think if Relator is raw, you can say all of that is just too much to think about. I've got enough friends already. I'm going to go back to them and deepen those relationships. But the mature side of that closed spectrum is curious. So being able to understand, I might walk into a room of brand new colleagues and not have every single one of them over to my wonder how I could connect with every single one of them. It's about being open to that connection. And very often I think because Relator does go deep with those relationships, sometimes one of the things we talk about is Relator having just a small group of trusted advisors, sort of a closed, close-knit group. And you know what, I'm not totally sure that is a part of Relator as much as it is perhaps a symptom of Relator. So I'm not sure that Relator is driven by saying, I want only a few friends. I think what Relator is driven by is saying, I want my relationships to be deep, to have longevity, to be very meaningful. And maybe because of that, there's not hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. But I've spoken with plenty of Relators who really do have a lot of good friends. and would say, maybe at least half of them they would consider to be best friends. But I think building toward that curiosity, the relators who I know are always open to thinking about how might I come across somebody who could become a best friend? How do I stay curious about what might be interesting about them and interesting about our potential relationship?
That might be a new thought for me, Mike. You might have taught me something there because I've always kind of characterized Relator as that narrow but deep relationships, putting maybe even a raw definition on it or limiting it with a raw definition when we think, that me versus we, that
Mm-hmm.
might be the me is I can only handle a certain number of close, deep relationships it's what I can handle as opposed to what you're saying in the mature of being more curious and being open, right, to allowing more but some deeper relationships in the we. How can I use that to make significant relationships with people that matter to them, and how can I pour myself into them in a deeper way? So maybe a new thought for me. Good job.
I think another way of talking about this is the second piece I've got here on raw to mature, full versus flexible. So I think the raw relator sees every relationship as being all or nothing. Either we're going to be best friends to the very end, stand up at my wedding, carry my casket at my funeral, or I'm not going to be your friend. Whereas mature, I think relator says there might be levels of intimacy. And I might get to be a trusted advisor to a lot more people than I myself trust. And I don't mean that in a manipulative way. I think people with high relator, because they're open to relationships, they speak the language of relationship, they're always there looking for that potential for a relationship. They can be somebody who is very loyal, who a lot of other people trust. And I think sometimes that can feel overwhelming for a relator to say, wow, I can't handle 25 more people who I have this huge, deep relationship with. But maybe there are levels of intimacy. Maybe there are people who I could be a professional best friend with. Maybe there are people who I could really take into my inner circle in my home, and maybe that's okay. So I think it's offering your relator talent at different levels so that other people can get a taste of how great you are at loving people.
And that flexibility requires you as the relator to adjust and adapt to what the needs are of those individuals. How can I be strategic in those relationships to provide just the right amount that allows me to reach more people?
Right.
So that's some work. Wow, I never thought of it that way. That's pretty cool. What else when we think of raw versus mature?
I think raw relator has a separation between life and work. I've coached a lot of relators who say, this is me, but this is me only at home because I don't have enough time to make those kind of close friendships at work. And after we've coached for a while, I'll start to ask, what, one of the things that you need is some time with those people who are really important to you. And if that means that you have to leave work in order to get it, you're going to have to take some time off work. And they'll realize, whoa, you know what, relationships are important to me 24 hours a day. So maybe I could grow some cohesiveness between who I work with and who I really trust at home. So I think it's not just saying you need to be best friends with everybody you work with professionally. I think the mature side of this is relational insight at work, not seeing this as two separate worlds, but being able to say, you know what, guys, I noticed who on this team is really getting along together because I see the world through a lens of relationship. Or I can give you some ideas of who might be some powerful partnerships, even if I'm not part of it, because I notice relationships. And it's that mature, I think, aspect of relator to say, even if I'm not the person who's a part of it, I know what's going on. I foster those relationships. Maybe I serve as a mentor to some other relationships so that I can be the voice at the table who helps us understand the importance of relationships.
A very powerful management technique, by the way, right? In groups, in teams, of knowing your people and knowing what they need and how to use them best.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really important in the management piece. What else do we have?
The last one here, I think raw relator is just hungry for connection. So if you're trying to say, how do I do some strength spotting? How might I notice some raw relator? Look for somebody who's just sort of passionately excited to make deeper connections with people. Not just, hey, we've got something in common, but hey, what does that lead to? How could that be even deeper? But I think sometimes that can get a little bit, you can get a little bit overwhelmed by how busy you are and wanting to make those connections all the time. If your plate is just too full, it can feel a little bit transactional. Mature relator is fed by friendship, and so that is intentionally making time to spend time with your closest friends, whether that's at work or at home, putting it on your list and spending some time with those people who you would say are in your most inner circle. I have yet to coach somebody with Relator who doesn't get fed by that. And I think a lot of times it can be easy to get swept up into the busyness. We're going to get into the most common theme with Relator in a little bit here, but spoiler alert, or maybe a teaser, the most common theme could be a clue as to why sometimes Relators feel a little bit too busy. It seems like if I'm talking with a Relator who's exhausted, and I ask them, when was the last time you spent some time with people who are your closest friends or your trusted advisors, they'll sort of exhale and they'll say, you know what, it's been too long. If you've got Relator, I think it's important to realize that not only are you great at building those relationships, you really need to be fed by those relationships as well. And that in itself is a huge benefit. The fact that you get fueled by spending time with people who you're close to. It's something to pay attention to and something to do on purpose.
Good insight. When we think about complementary themes, we've got a couple listed there. What do we think of?
So I came up with two. One of them was I was thinking about how do you use that insight, that relational insight, in a way that helps people get things done. So I thought having a partner with high arranger might be a great complement to somebody with Relator. What somebody with arranger could bring is that ability to say, here's the task and here's how it all bubbles up. And then the Relator could say, okay, I know the best place for these people to go within that task. And it could be because you yourself as the Relator have made those relationships and you know those people on a deep level. It could also be because you're looking for opportunities for powerful partnership among other people.
Can we go back? There's a question in the chat room real quick. We think
Sure.
of Rob versus mature. So
Sure.
Elizabeth asked this question: can Rob be disappointed by not having the importance of the relationship being returned?
Okay, so this is a question that we asked in season 1. I was watching this talk about a plane, train, automobile. I was listening to it while I was gassing up my car yesterday, and there were, Kurt himself has Relator, as does Brian Brim, and both of them answered that they'd never really felt that disappointed by people who weren't reciprocating that relationship. Kurt says it was because he also had Maximizer, and so he's probably a little bit more choosy. And if you find out that somebody else isn't going to reciprocate, you'd rather move on to somebody who would. I don't know. I think that's something to ask a Relator. Maybe have you ever had a time where a relationship didn't go both ways, or somebody wasn't interested in building that relationship with you? I mean, I imagine it would hurt. I think it's hard to say it wouldn't. I think what I do know to be true is that when Relators feel that reciprocal authenticity, that it really fills their bucket, that Relators want somebody that they can let their guard down, and they want somebody who will let their guard down with them.
Yeah, and invest in that time, invest in that relationship.
Yeah. What would you say, Jim? Relator's 25 for me, so I really don't have it, but what's it like personally for you?
Yeah, I think there are moments, there are times, although for me, the woo is so overpowering that I move so fast and so quickly. Sometimes I have to be reminded, or I'll even think, oh, that relationship, I started pouring into that relationship and then we never came back to it.
Yeah.
And I have to kind of be reminded again, oh, yeah, that didn't get, but I think I'm keenly aware that, and I think even from a management perspective, that relationships happen on purpose. They're never things that happen in a vacuum or on accident. And in some ways, that analogy can break down a little bit. But for Relators, I think they've got to they have to intentionally approach these, and they want to. And that investment piece is so important in making those connections on purpose and for reasons. And so it's they quickly want to get past the water cooler conversation and begin to talk about things that matter and that are important to make those deep connections. My mom, who I'm a lot like her, she tries to make these connections and get these relationships built in, and it looks like Relator, but I think it's more of a context theme. She wants to get to know people so she can understand their history not
Mm.
really do anything with it. And so I think that on the relator side, it's to how can I take this information that I know about this person and make their life better? How can I invest in their world? How can I pour myself into them to make their world a better place? And so I think that's
Wow.
kind of the true essence of Relator and how we know it's working in its mature state.
Maybe that's a new raw and mature, whereas the raw is perhaps put off by the fact that it's not reciprocated, but the mature is taking it from that stance of what can I give you? Because I see depth.
Yeah. The me versus we, and how do I take the
Yeah.
we version of that to its ultimate state, which is in how do I make other people's lives better? How can I have that a life-changing effect on someone? And it doesn't have to be relator, right? You can be a relator and figure out ways to pour yourself into people who have these different, unique themes in that. And this is Micah, this is the danger in it. They may not have the themes to be able to reciprocate, right? They may not be able to give back as much as you're pouring in. And so, to your question, or there was a question in the chat room, do I feel disappointed when it's not reciprocated? Well, you have to really look at what are they capable of? Like, can they? And if they
Yeah.
can't,
I think the question, one of the dangers in talking about relator is not everybody has it. I
right?
don't. And people often asked if I have relator, and I say no because I think it's just as important for people to realize that again, it's not about the outcome, but the way you get to the outcome. I have lots of deep relationships. I'm married to somebody with high relator, and I'd say we've got a pretty great thing going on. But I connect in very different ways than somebody with relator does. So it's important to say, okay, how are you going to reciprocate, and how are you going to make those connections? Not just are you or aren't you.
Yeah, yeah. Did we cover the second
No, the
compliment?
second one. Okay, so I want to see what you think about this, Jim. I was thinking, again, how do we think about influencing people in a great partnership? One of the partnerships I thought about in a complementary theme with Relator is competition. So if you've got high Relator, thinking about having a partner who has high competition, what that could look like is what's the very best way to help people win? Again, that me versus we, like you were talking about. So it would be a partnership where you wouldn't just be talking about the relationship, but really talking about how do we get somewhere to where we're going. It's been really fun to watch the Rio Olympics this week and watch those relationships that happen, and then see how together they compete and they think about how do we do things better than anybody else. And I think that could be a really powerful way to take that relator and really light it on fire.
Yeah, for sure. And influence that in a way for an outcome, right? I think
Yeah.
that's with competition. That's one of those things in its mature state. I think it's an influencer for a positive outcome, and because sometimes we have to push hard to get to those outcomes. And I see people with high competition all the time using that theme in their favor of pushing other people forward or themselves forward for that incredible outcome. So I like it. When we think about likely pairs and unlikely pairs
Yeah.
out of the database, I know this is the favorite part for a lot of people. What do we have out of the database?
So what we have here is a representative sample. It's of a 250,000 people completing StrengthsFinder, and we look at what shows up in their top 5 the most and the least. The most likely pair with Relator is the theme of responsibility, which I alluded to earlier might be what leads people with high Relator to feel like they've got a lot on their plate, because responsibility is about following through on what you say you will do. That means that you probably end up getting asked to do more than other people. It's both of them, I think, share this external motivation. So Relator is loyalty through the emotion or through the connection, and responsibility is loyalty through the deed or through the service. Both of them are very others focused. Now, a part of it is focused on what am I moving, what am I checking off my list. The other is focused on how are we deepening our relationship. When you've got them both together, I see that as sort of almost like a servant friend, a trusted advisor who also helps you follow through on things. Or perhaps it's just that relator piece, but also got my eye on the list of what have we committed to. There's an element of promise to responsibility that I think very oftentimes attracts other people to people with high responsibility, because even without relator, responsibility looks like loyalty, because if I say I will do it, I'll follow through. And to others, that can feel like stability and compassion. When you add Relator, I think it even softens that connection and makes it slightly more emotional. It's about feeling what you say that you will do and not just transactionally.
Yeah, what about unlikely?
So there's a tie. There are two themes that are both the least likely to show up with Relator. Both of them happen just about 3% of the time. The first one is woo, and we use Relator and woo when we're teaching these in abstract, when we're teaching them sort of by themselves, as being contrasting themes. Woo is about social breadth, whereas Relator is about social depth. And I think it's easy to talk about these almost as opposites, but even though they happen together only 3% of the time, I've come across several people who have both of them. If you had both woo and Relator, you'd be Jim, and you could talk about very quickly bouncing back, very quickly making initial connections. Woo is about that fast paced. I think woo is really that ability to share yourself very quickly in a way that magnetically attracts other people to you. Relator is just then going that one step further and saying, okay, I've made my connections with everybody. I've sort of turned on that charisma, and now I can think about where am I going to have my deepest relationships, and it doesn't have to be an either or. But I think it makes sense why they don't happen very often, because maybe they're both, if they're both really strong, potent themes, and every single one is, I think they could both dominate your understanding of what it is to be social. And so you could see how you might have one or the other. But Jim, what would you say about having them both?
Well, I like to use the party analogy, right? We kind of always say that at a party, a woo tries to meet everybody, and a Relator tries to meet a few. I try to do both. So I'll work the room until I find a few interesting people, and then I want to dig in and find a few. Usually, though, it's an influence for me. My Relator is influenced by my woo, and so the relationships go deep for influence. It's not, it's in, for my case, it's how can we work together, or what kind of things can I discover about you that would help me take in a practical case, is how can I bring my internship programs to what you're doing so that we can get more of your students, or how in the case of the webcast that we do here, how can I meet as many people as possible so that we can influence them to listen to our webcast or take on the professional development that we do, those kinds of things. And yet, I had spent an hour last night with a coach who reached out to me last night and said, hey, can we talk for a few minutes? And we had this great phone conversation for an hour that was very Relator oriented, although for me, still, again, influenced heavy by the woo. So the Relator is, I have the abilities to do that, but it always is to get to information so that I can influence them or win them, type deal.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Neat.
kind of how it works. What are some, for me anyways, what are some final thoughts before we dig into the
Oh, you know what?
dynamics?
There's actually one more on unlikely
yeah,
pairs.
you're right,
Sorry,
you're right.
I went so deep into woo, but there's another one that's tied for last place, and that is command. So command and Relator don't show up very often, and I think about this as command is social direction versus Relator is social connection. Command, maybe what you're talking about here is more of an influencing theme. So command probably says, we need to do this, or let's go this direction, whereas Relator would maybe say, hold on, let's see what we're doing together. But you absolutely could have both of them, and I think if you had both command and Relator, what a powerful combination that would be if you were helping manage people, helping organize, helping sort of compassionately direct. So it certainly could happen together. It just doesn't very often.
Cool. Let me set up the theme dynamics. You want to do some final thoughts?
Yeah. So if you are coaching someone with Relator, tell them you care about them. I think that's something they're not going to take lightly, and it's not going to sound cheesy. It is something that's going to be important. So first look at your own themes and ask yourself, how do I communicate that I care in the way that's most authentic to me? Because it's going to be very important to that Relator that you are your authentic, genuine self with them, and that you start from a place of building rapport. I think when, some things that we should help Relators do is help them to determine the best, most quick way, or the quickest way. So very often, if you get, I remember coaching an executive team who all had high Relator, but they couldn't get along together. And what we found through some real deep reflection and provocation was that they were all really busy relating with other people, with their own constituency, and it didn't feel like they had room for each other. But if they could have just quickly communicated the importance of relationships in their lives, they would have realized that they all had this same sort of common ground. So I think, how do you communicate, first of all, what you think about relationships in general? And then how do you communicate that you feel that you care about the people that you're working with? So being able to say that out loud in your own words, I think, is pretty important. I would also think about how can I help you, if you're a relator, find ways to interact with colleagues in one-on-one settings, because that's going to help you build trust over time. Trust, we know, is perhaps the most important aspect of any relationship, so invest in that by making sure that you get some one-on-one time. Relators are great in groups, but they build that trust when they can really sort of be vulnerable and break down any pretenses or any walls, and one-on-one time tends to be the very best way for relators to get to that point. When you're in those one-on-one times with your colleagues, get to know their goals, get to know what's important to them, get curious about it. Interesting, you were talking about context and your mom building relationships out of context. I think perhaps people with high context want to know you so that they can know your story. I think you could flip that for relator. Relator need to know your story so that they can know you. So think about, how can you connect and get to know the story of other people. One might be looking for their goals. Another might be just really honing your radar for strength, getting better at understanding what are some clues to talent for each individual, and really pay attention to, when are your colleagues, your friends, your other people in your family even, when are they really showing some glimpses of excellence? When are they in flow? When are they really satisfied? What are they attracted to? And how can you reflect that back to them? If you can be paying attention for some strength spotting there in other people, that's one way that you'll show that you care, and one way that you can really, I think, catch the attention of that other person in a one-on-one setting. I also think, think about the idea of generosity with Relator. I think that it's a very generous theme. I want that connection with other people, and therefore I'm constantly paying attention to connection. Think about that theme of generosity, and what does it mean in your life? How does it play out with your values? How does it play out with your work or your community or your family? And then how is it a benefit to the bottom line in your work or your family or your community? What does generosity bring other people? And how can you be the first person in line to give that generosity, whether it's with a client or a partner? Also think about, who are your trusted advisors and who trusts you, and then do some work on maybe reflecting on how intentionally you're deepening those relationships, because I think there's something so cool about Relator, and that there's never a cap to how deep you can go. And that's powerful and beautiful and unique to Relator in terms of that depth of relationship, and not something, this is going to sound like a pun, but it's not something we should take lightly.
Benedict in the chat room says, one note. I think this is worth talking about, Micah. It says, sorry for the analytical showing here. It says, when you look at likely and unlikely pairings, often achiever comes up as likely, but achiever is one of the most common strengths, and it is indeed, that's the truth. Likewise, command is one of the rarest and often shows up as unlikely pairings. So my guess is that in many cases it'll show up as likely and unlikely purely on being the most common one anyway, rather than actually being statistically more likely than just chance. And so I think we've said this several times when we talk about it, is we say it could be, command does show up because it is the most uncommon. We have learner and achiever up at the top, and so that is true. Yeah, in the statistics and the way we pull that can often be the case. This likely and unlikely was something Kurt used to pull out, and we've maintained that for the season. We'll do something different next year, but yeah, Mike, any thought? Yes.
Oh,
I
totally.
would agree with that.
Yeah, you're spot on there. I'm looking at the entire list here of likely and most likely, and there's only about 10 different themes that show up as most likely with all 34. It's about the top 10 most likely in our database are also the top 10 most likely that pair with every single other one. That being said, there's about 5 to 10 different themes in the least likely column, and they're all the same ones, and they tend to be those that are least likely overall. So I like to explain what the commonalities and differences are between the most likely and least likely pair with the theme of the week, just because it helps us compare and contrast. But at the end of the day, it could simply be a statistic that the most likely pairs are also the most likely overall, and the least likely also don't happen very much.
Yeah.
So no, absolutely, that's something to keep in mind there. But what it does give us is it gives us something to look out for. It gives us something to say, wow, once you meet somebody with those least likely pairs, ask them what it looks like, ask them how that plays out. And when you meet somebody with those most likely pairs, it probably helps us understand a little bit about the theme, because we know that, okay, here's what it means by itself, but if we know that 36% of the time it's paired with this other theme, that helps us understand a little bit about what our world looks like as well.
Yeah, and I think a really common, Micah, we talk about this all the time, but we should be asking people the question. When we think about these themes, we should be asking them these questions and not trying to predict their, we're not fortune tellers. We're not strengths
No,
fortune tellers.
we're not looking at a whole bunch of tarot cards and saying, this is what I see. I coached a coach last week who told me that she avoids theme dynamics because she's afraid she's going to get it wrong. And I said, you know what, you'll never get it wrong if you just ask them. And the point here isn't that you can predict exactly what they are. It is that you can deepen your understanding of these themes and how they change when they're paired with others, so that you can be an inquisitive scientist about your practice here, so that you can think about what might this look like, and then how do I ask questions to either prove or disprove my theory.
Yeah, one of the things I see on Facebook, which I got to be careful on when we do this, is when we're emphatic about these things. So you're this way, so it should be, you should see this and this. We use words like should, or when I think we should use words like could, or it might be, or do you see this?
Or just a question, do you? Yeah. How do you? When do you?
Exactly.
And on all of this, a great conversation to have. I want to go back to something Benedict said. Please don't say sorry for the analytical. Don't apologize. That led to a beautiful conversation, and there's something gorgeous and powerful about that analysis. So thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, and be careful not to lead people in these. Like, this is the discovery of themselves, and so knowing some of these definitions, knowing some of these interactions should always lead to questions like, well, could it be like this, or have you felt like this before, as a prompting question to them. And so I just get a little worried sometimes when I see the fortune telling that, or the strengths telling, so to speak, because ultimately the individual is the one who decides or can play it out in them. It's for us to kind of prompt those pieces. And so we're just one of those things. All right, we're going to run out of time. Let's jump into theme dynamics real quick, and I'll show that up here. We put the questions out to you on the Facebook group, the Call to Coach Facebook group, every single week. You help us choose those, and so the first one we have is Relator and Learner.
Oh, I love these two together. Sometimes we talk about these as being the way that you could make up for low woo. We say, you know what, just go learn a lot about the people who you love, and it'll make them feel wooed. I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek. But Relator and Learner together, it sounds like this. Your deepest, longest friendships don't stagnate because you strive to discover something new about those who are familiar. That depth of Relator. And there, I think, is where you can hear how Relator brings depth to another theme. Learner by itself seems a little bit more about breadth, because it is the process of learning which typically leads learners to just knowing a little bit about a lot of things. But Relator brings depth to it and says, no, I can learn more about where I'm already familiar.
As we look at Relator and Strategic, I do want to remind everyone, this book, Expanding Your Strengths, now available in ebook form internationally, in almost every country that you can think of. So if you were waiting to purchase this and you couldn't because it was only available in the US, Canada, and UK for the longest time, this is available now. Head out to coaching.gallup.com, click on the resources tab, scroll to the bottom, and you'll see the link. There is a link now to be able to purchase this internationally. So if you've been waiting, now's the time. Strategically thinking, though, Relator and Strategic, Micah.
Yeah, strategic is a strategic thinking theme. It's all about seeing the whole big picture, picking up with patterns, and being able to think about the what-if scenarios. When you put that together with Relator, it sounds like this. Conceptually, you love to consider the breadth of multiple options. Socially, you prefer deep connections with a few good friends. So you can hear both of them there. It's about how do I think about having a plan, think about having a pattern. Maybe strategic is how I build those relationships as I'm picking up on a pattern with my close friends and being able to think about, if I go there, then how is that going to affect the relationship and how can I deepen it?
Yeah. How about when we add maximizer to it?
Yeah, I think it makes it even pickier. It makes it say, you know what? I want a few close friends who I'm positive are going to give me a lot of return on investment. That investment, then it just changes. It's not about the stock price. It's about the investment of the relationship. It's about intimacy and connection. It sounds like this. You are selective about work and friendships, so you focus more on the quality of your results and relationships than on their quantity.
And when we add individualization,
Two relationship building themes together. I think about this as being a really powerful pair. In fact, I wanted to put these two up as complementary themes, but it kept hitting me how much more powerful they might be if they were both inside one person. The nature of another person is easy for you to see, but you also want someone to know the real, authentic you. I think this one's so cool because individualization is all about thinking about what lights somebody else's fire, and Relator then is about how do I know that and deepen it. So a powerful pair if you had both of them.
I'm going to do a little change up here. We had analytical, but I'm going to bring in woo because we talked about this a couple times.
Yeah.
And I love these apparent opposites, right? When we think about it, but I love to highlight them together because they can exist together. When we think about Relator and woo, what do we think about?
Well, I think about Susie Paff, one of my very first friends at Gallup, who helped my husband propose to me on one day after work. But I also think about how powerful this is. Socially versatile. You build broad social networks with multiple constituents, as well as deep intimacy with your closest friends. And in Susie, it looked like she made absolutely everybody who came across her desk feel like they were important and loved. But she also was the person who, my husband, when he was just my boyfriend, knew that he could call her and she would, walk 1,000 miles to help him set up this proposal. And it was that depth piece. And we're still friends now because she's got high Relator.
Yeah, that's awesome. Next week, let me double check the schedule here. If you ever want to see the schedule, by the way, head out to coaching.gallup.com, click on the GWSW tab, and the schedule for the rest of the year is out there. Next week, we're talking about responsibility. We put those two together. First, talk about responsibility, and then let's dig into what that looks like together.
Can't wait to talk about responsibility next week. It's an awesome theme. It is all about if you say something, you will. If you say that you'll do something, you will do it. I often say people with high responsibility might as well tattoo their promises to their forehead because they follow through. So it's an executing theme, and it's about the commitment and the promise that you make of that external locus of control on what you execute upon. When you put that together with Relator, we talked about this a little because they do happen quite a bit. The longer you serve customers, colleagues, or friends, the more likely you are to appreciate them and the more they are likely to appreciate you. So it's that mutual appreciation that might be based on service, on deed, but it's certainly there and is authentic and loyal when you put them together. Pretty cool.
Yeah, cool indeed. Responsibility very high for my wife, and thank God, because I without that, our house would just be a wreck. I mean, she, with 5 kids and all the things we have going on, and she is able to. She also has very high discipline, and so those have been a great pairing for me. I mean, when you think about opposites, we're quintessential on that, and just a great opportunity. She loves, and I actually have learned to kind of love and crave that discipline, responsibility themes in her. I try to give her a lot of affirmation around those, and all the credit, like all the credit. She gets, I get credit for nothing. When we think about the success our kids have had, it's all on her. And so, but it's been fun when we pair those two together. I'm looking forward to a responsibility next week too, because it helps me dig in and really understand that. Because for somebody like me, that discipline and that responsibility that go together can sometimes be grating, and I have really learned to love it, and to rely on it, and to really just kind of dig in on it. And so, looking forward to talking about that next week.
Well, and as somebody who gets to benefit from you being at your best, I feel like I should also thank Sarah for managing the house with high responsibility and discipline. By proxy, I very much appreciate her strengths as being a great partner to you.
Yeah, indeed. Alicia asked this question. She says, random question, does relating in this fast-paced chat room work for relators? That's a great question, right? Because the
I'm sure
chat room
there's
is
some
such a
relators out there who can
line.
answer this. I don't know. Does it? I
Yeah.
think that's a great question, and perhaps an awesome question to ask relators in general is what's the best way for you to connect? The relators in my life, I know would say it has to be face to face, which is really interesting, and I think is going to might change if you look at the digital world that we're in. But I know that I've asked this question to relators who I know and love, and they say that it really, really needs to be in person, and then it's augmented by some online sort of contacts. But I don't know. I would love to hear what do people think about that? Does it work in the chat room?
Yeah, Jennifer had asked, I think, a question earlier. Could we provide the chat room transcripts in the post so people could watch it and kind of read it? And that's a very difficult process for us to get done, and adds a lot of processing time onto what we do. So we've chosen not to do it for now. But it's a good question, Micah. It's one of those a relator would want to kind of, or who knows what that is. That could be a little analytical, trying to dig in. I want to understand, or no, it could be a little input. I want to know and understand everything that's happening in this. I always say, my advice was in the chat room, watch a live and pay attention to the chat room while it's live, because we
Yeah.
always record this, and you can always go back and listen to it again on your own with earbuds when you're taking notes, those kinds of things. So if you're coming out and listening live, focus on the chat conversation while we're live, because that goes away. Then go back and listen to it again, because this is what I have to do. A lot of people think, oh, you're a master, you can keep track of everything. No, we end, and I can't remember like 90% of the conversation that we had. I have to go back and listen to it again to really learn and hear all the things. I get 1 or 2 points out of this, but if I'm going to really learn it, I gotta go back and listen to it again. So that's my advice for you guys. If you do watch live, maybe it's worth, and it's available, via podcast or webcasting or other on YouTube. It's available for you. So making that second, I totally get it. Making that transcript available would be helpful. I get it. It's just a bunch of work for us, and one of those things that at this point I can't invest the time in because I'm doing other stuff. So maybe I get a little break for that, Micah. Maybe.
I think you get a break. I think if it's something you really want, copy and paste it right now. Do it for yourself.
Yeah, well, we do it during the learning series. Yeah, you can go back and copy and paste it if you guys. The chat is available, although it only goes back, I think, 250. No, I can't remember if this is this chat service or somebody else's. But you can go copy and paste this. It does work. It's one of those things right now we can't do for you. We can. It just would take an enormous amount of time. We got a lot of other things going on. But I appreciate your feedback. We actually have a service that I'm looking at for season 3 where the chat would replay with the video in real time.
Oh,
so you would
sweet.
see the chat coming. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. That would be kind of interesting. Trying to make it in ways that don't require a bunch of somebody's time to get it done.
We thrive on your feedback, so thanks for this. And I think a lot of times people assume that Jim is a lot more of a team than he is, but he is one person moving mountains. We do have a team who supports us, but sometimes I think, Jim, a lot of things come out even better than we expected, and then it looks like it's because we've got a whole bunch of resources working on it, when the truth is we have to be pretty selective and prioritize. So Thank you for making it look like it's easy, Jim.
Well, you're welcome, and I always appreciate, like you said, I always appreciate that feedback. As we kind of put a wrap in on, and by the way, as a manager, you can't always say yes to everything, so sometimes I have to just say no, and I appreciate your guys' patience with us as well when we do that. Well, as we put a final wrap here on Relator, any final thoughts?
Yeah, you know what? I've got one final thought that's pretty cool. There's a man who was born in 1862 in Greensboro, North Carolina, in the U.S., which is not very far from where I live. And his name was William Sidney Porter. He wrote under the pen name O. Henry. And in a book that he wrote, there's this quote, and I think it's perfect. It is, "No friendship happens by accident." And I think when you think about Relator and the thoughtfulness and the purposefulness of those connections, it's a really great way to sort of wrap up this idea of Relator, of it doesn't just happen. Friendship does not happen by accident. It's on purpose.
Yeah, I think I think the value is living most of your relationships on purpose. And so we'll encourage you to do that. We'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available, speaking of living on purpose, out of the Gallup Strength Center. That's just gallupstrengthcenter.com. Send us your questions, comments, or you'd like to be a guest blogger. We do take those. We can't take all of them, but if you've got something you want to write that down, send it in to us. Send it to coaching@gallup.com. Put guest blogger in the subject line. That'll make its way over to Micah, and we get several of those a month, and we'd love to consider yours as well. You can also catch the recorded audio and video of this program, plus all the past ones as well. We have a ton out there, guys. We also have the links to our Facebook group, YouTube page, iTunes and RSS feeds, iPhone and Android apps, as well as all the weekly strengths. It's a lot of stuff out there, Micah.
There's tons of stuff. We've got all your professional development covered for you, clients. Check it out.
Coaching.gallup.com. Click on the resources tab. It's all there. If I've missed something, by the way, on the resources tab, let me know, and we'll fill it in. If you're interested in becoming Gallup Certified Strengths Coach, we have a list of all our courses available on courses.gallup.com. One of my interns, by the way, is completely redesigning that course page, so it'd be really cool to see that come out here in the next 30 to 60 days or so. And so check that out, courses.gallup.com. If you're interested in discovering all 34 of your talent themes, that's available for an upgrade price, and if you want to jump out there to do that, just visit the Strength Center to get it done. I really recommend you get a coach at that point. So if you're going to do that, jump out there. We have a whole directory of coaches that you could connect with. We recommend that as well. If you found this helpful, we'd ask that you share it. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Mike, always great to see you. And with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.